Today, we dive into a powerful story of resilience and the fight for justice. Meet Mabel, an elderly woman whose birthday celebration takes a heartbreaking turn in her son's cafe when she faces discrimination. In that moment of humiliation, Mabel finds the strength to stand up, not just for herself, but for everyone who has been silenced. Let's get started. On a chilly evening in late autumn, when the last rays of sunlight slipped beneath the horizon, an elderly woman named Mabel stepped into the cozy confines of the Hearthstone Café. This restaurant, a small family-owned establishment, had been a cherished retreat for Mabel over the years. The gentle hum of conversations, the fragrant aromas of simmering spices, and the soft glow of candlelight created an atmosphere of warmth and comfort. But tonight, something felt decidedly amiss. As Mabel entered, she was met with a palpable shift in the air, as if the very fabric of the cafe had changed overnight. She surveyed the familiar surroundings with a frown. The cheerful chatter she had come to love seemed muted, overshadowed by a tension she could not quite place. A few tables were occupied by regular patrons, their laughter echoing faintly, yet no one offered her the usual nod of recognition. The staff, known for their friendly smiles, seemed preoccupied, their expressions distant and cold. Mabel paused just inside the doorway, letting the warmth of the cafe wash over her. It felt strange, almost foreign, and her heart sank slightly. This cafe had been her sanctuary, a place filled with memories of birthdays, anniversaries, and quiet moments of reflection. Tonight was particularly special. It was her birthday, a day she had celebrated here many times before with friends and family. She had made a reservation just yesterday, excited for the evening ahead. But as she walked deeper into the cafe, the anxiety bubbling in her chest intensified. It felt as if she were stepping into a place that no longer welcomed her. Her gaze fell on a new face behind the counter, a young waiter with tousled hair and an air of impatience. He barely acknowledged her presence, scribbling something on a notepad, a frown etched on his brow. Mabel hesitated, the familiar warmth of the cafe now a chilling void. Perhaps he was just having a rough day. She reminded herself that everyone had their burdens to carry. With a gentle resolve, she approached the counter, her heart fluttering with unease. "Hello," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "I have a reservation under the name Mabel." The waiter looked up, irritation flickering in his eyes, and for a moment, Mabel thought she saw contempt. "There are no tables available," he replied flatly, without even glancing at the reservation book. Mabel's heart sank. "I called yesterday to confirm my reservation. Could you please check again?" Her voice wavered slightly, but she held her ground. He sighed heavily, rolling his eyes as if her request was an unreasonable demand. "I told you, there are no tables. You should try somewhere else." His tone was dismissive, as if she were a bothersome fly rather than a loyal customer. A tightness gripped Mabel's chest, an all-too-familiar sensation that had haunted her for decades. She had experienced this type of treatment before, the cold shoulder, the judgmental glances, but not here. Not in a place where she had built so many memories. She straightened her back, mustering the dignity she had cultivated through years of quiet endurance. "Are you sure?" she pressed gently, her resolve starting to waver. "I can wait by the counter if need be." The waiter crossed his arms, his smirk growing wider. "There's nothing for you here," he retorted, his eyes flicking over her worn coat and sensible shoes. "This isn't your kind of place anymore." The word struck her like a slap, and the cafe seemed to shrink around her. She felt the weight of his disdain, the invisible chains of prejudice binding her in place. She looked around, meeting the eyes of other diners, some glancing away in discomfort, others watching with a morbid curiosity. Mabel felt exposed, vulnerable under their scrutiny. How many had witnessed this act of humiliation? How many had chosen to remain silent? For a fleeting moment, Mabel contemplated walking out. She was tired of fighting the same battles, tired of proving her worth to those who refused to see her humanity. Yet, a flicker of defiance ignited within her. She wasn't just another customer, she was Mabel, a woman with a lifetime of stories, love, and resilience. This young man, unaware of her connection to the cafe, had no idea who he was speaking to. "Perhaps you don't realize who I am," she said quietly, her voice steady, though her heart raced. She hoped to appeal to a shred of reason within him. The waiter chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't care who you are," he replied, his expression hardening. "There's no place for people like you here." The phrase echoed in her mind, a cruel reminder of every time she had been told she didn't belong, every time she had been made to feel less than. The sense of betrayal cut deeper in a place that had always felt like home. Mabel felt her shoulders sag under the weight of his words, her dignity threatened. But she refused to let him push her out. Not today. The waiter leaned in slightly, his tone dripping with condescension. "Why don't you just leave? You're wasting everyone's time." The restaurant felt like it was closing in around her, yet she stood her ground, her heart pounding in defiance. "I'm not asking for anything unreasonable," Mabel said, her voice low but firm. "I would like to speak to the manager." His eyes narrowed, and he opened his mouth to respond, but Mabel pressed on, refusing to let him dismiss her. "I confirmed my reservation yesterday. Please check again." With a dramatic sigh, the waiter leaned back, crossing his arms defiantly. "I've already told you, there are no tables available." The tension in the air thickened, a silent standoff brewing between them. Mabel felt the weight of his words pressing down on her, but instead of crumbling, she gathered her strength. She remembered all the times she had endured this kind of treatment. She remembered being a child, being followed in stores, being told she couldn't sit in certain sections, being overlooked in her career because of who she was. "No," she said, shaking her head. "This isn't just a misunderstanding." The waiter's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "It doesn't matter who you think you are," he snapped. "You're not welcome here." His finality struck Mabel with the force of a thunderclap. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks, a mixture of anger and hurt threatening to boil over. Yet, she held fast, the quiet resolve of a woman who had spent her life facing adversity. "I'll wait for the manager," she replied, her voice calm but unwavering. The waiter's face shifted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. But he turned away without a word, leaving Mabel standing alone at the counter, the eyes of the restaurant upon her. She felt their gaze, curious, judgmental, perhaps sympathetic, but she refused to let it shake her. When the manager finally arrived, he wore an expression of haste, his brow furrowed in concern. "I'm terribly sorry about the confusion," he said, glancing between Mabel and the waiter, who had retreated to a corner, his arrogance replaced by anxiety. "Let me find you a table right away." Mabel met his gaze, her expression calm but resolute. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady. "But I think we need to address more than just seating me." The manager's demeanor shifted, recognition dawning in his eyes. He had seen Mabel in the cafe many times before, had known her as a loyal customer. But today, the situation was different. He felt the weight of her presence, the significance of the moment heavy in the air. "I understand," he said cautiously. "I'll speak with the staff about this." But Mabel wasn't satisfied with a simple apology. "This isn't just about a table," she pressed, her voice growing stronger. "What happened here today wasn't about availability, it was about respect, about the lack of it." The manager stiffened, caught off guard by her directness. He glanced at the waiter, who was shifting uncomfortably, now aware of the gravity of his actions. "You're absolutely right, Mabel," the manager said, his tone filled with urgency. "I assure you, we will deal with this appropriately." Mabel shook her head. "No, it's not enough. This needs to be addressed at its core. If this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone who walks through those doors. I won't stand for it." The murmurings in the cafe grew louder as patrons began to take notice of the escalating confrontation. Mabel felt their eyes on her, but this time, she welcomed it. She wasn't afraid to be the center of attention, not when the stakes were so high. She would not let this moment fade into the background. The manager's face flushed with concern, realizing the potential fallout. He had to act decisively. We take these matters seriously, he insisted, his voice rising slightly. This behavior does not reflect our values. Mabel raised an eyebrow, sensing the insincerity in his words. Values, she echoed. What values? You let this young man treat me like an inconvenience. That speaks volumes about your establishment. The cafe fell silent, the tension palpable. The manager glanced around, his nervousness evident as he struggled to regain control of the situation. I apologize for this misunderstanding, he began, but Mabel cut him off. This isn't just about me, she reiterated. It's about ensuring this doesn't happen again to anyone else. I want accountability. The manager opened his mouth, but the words failed him. He could feel the eyes of the diners upon him, the weight of their scrutiny pressing down. He was no longer just addressing a complaint, he was standing at the precipice of a larger conversation about racism and respect within his own establishment. Mabel held her ground, unwavering. I'll be watching, she said firmly, her voice low but filled with conviction. She knew her son would hear about this, and when he did, she hoped it would lead to real change. As Mabel stood at the counter, her heart racing, she felt a familiar surge of strength coursing through her veins. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every person who had ever felt the sting of prejudice. The manager nodded solemnly, acknowledging the gravity of her words. After a few moments, the atmosphere in the cafe had shifted. What began as a whisper of confrontation now escalated into a full-blown discussion about dignity and respect. Mabel felt empowered, and she could see the patrons beginning to rally around her. Their glances exchanged spoke volumes. This was a shared experience, a moment that transcended her individual struggle. Just then, a voice broke through the murmurs. I think we need to remember what this cafe stands for, said an older gentleman sitting at a corner table. We've always prided ourselves on being a community space, haven't we? Mabel turned to face him, her heart swelling with gratitude. Exactly, she replied, her voice rising with passion. We are all part of this community. We deserve respect, and we must demand it. Another diner chimed in, I've seen Mabel here for years. She deserves a table just as much as anyone else. The support grew, a chorus of agreement echoing through the cafe. The manager, now visibly sweating under the pressure, took a deep breath. I appreciate your comments, everyone. We will ensure that this behavior does not happen again. Mabel, I would like to formally apologize on behalf of our establishment. Mabel studied him carefully, weighing his sincerity. I appreciate the apology, she said slowly, but words are not enough. Actions speak louder. You must hold your staff accountable and ensure they understand the values this cafe represents. The manager nodded, understanding the weight of her request. You're right. We will implement training for all staff immediately. This will include sensitivity training, diversity education, and an emphasis on treating every customer with respect. A round of applause broke out in the cafe, the sound echoing like a thunderclap in the quiet room. Mabel felt a rush of warmth wash over her. For the first time that evening, she felt like she was not alone in her fight. The waiter, who had been lurking in the background, shifted uncomfortably. He had likely expected to remain a nameless figure, but now he was very much in the spotlight. The collective gaze of the diners weighed heavily upon him, the gravity of his actions finally sinking in. Do you have anything to say? Mabel asked, her tone firm yet composed. The waiter opened his mouth to speak but hesitated. After a moment, he managed to stammer, I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough, Mabel replied. You have to understand why your words matter. You have the power to make someone feel less than, and that power should never be wielded carelessly. The waiter nodded, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, he muttered, but Mabel could see he was beginning to understand the weight of his words and actions. Mabel turned her attention back to the manager. I want to ensure this isn't just a one-time reaction, she said. You have a responsibility to create a culture of inclusivity, to make sure everyone who walks through these doors knows they are valued. Absolutely, the manager replied, determination in his voice. We'll create a formal policy that emphasizes our commitment to diversity and respect for all customers. This will be a cornerstone of our establishment moving forward." As the conversation continued, Mabel felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had stood up for herself, but more importantly, she had stood up for others who might not have had the same courage or support. The atmosphere in the cafe was charged with a new energy, one of hope and possibility. After what felt like an eternity, the discussion began to wind down. The diners resumed their meals, but the air remained thick with the energy of the moment. Mabel felt a sense of pride swelling within her, knowing she had made a difference. She turned to the manager one last time. "Thank you for listening," she said softly. "I look forward to seeing how the Hearthstone Cafe evolves from this experience." With a nod, he smiled back at her. "We won't let you down, Mabel. You have my word." As she walked to the exit, Mabel felt a sense of triumph she had rarely experienced in her life. She had faced the storm and emerged stronger, a warrior for respect and dignity. Outside, the cool evening air wrapped around her like a comforting blanket, a stark contrast to the heated moments inside. When Mabel arrived home, she felt a profound sense of relief. She sank into her favorite armchair, the weight of the evening finally settling on her shoulders. She reflected on everything that had transpired, the confrontation, the support, and the promise of change. Her son, Marcus, entered the room just then, his face a mask of concern. "Mom, are you okay? I saw the video online. I'm so sorry that happened to you." Mabel looked up at him, her heart swelling with love for her son. "I'm fine, sweetheart. More than fine, actually. We had an important conversation about respect and inclusivity tonight. It was a moment of awakening for everyone in that cafe." Marcus sighed, relief washing over him. "I'm glad to hear that. I just hate that you had to go through it at all. You deserve better." "I do," she replied, a soft smile on her lips. "But tonight wasn't just about me. It was about standing up for everyone who has faced discrimination. We're all connected in this struggle." In the days that followed, Mabel and Marcus found themselves wrapped up in the aftermath of the incident. Videos of the confrontation had spread rapidly on social media, igniting discussions far beyond the walls of the Hearthstone Cafe. The community rallied around them, showing overwhelming support. People shared their own stories of discrimination, creating a shared sense of understanding and solidarity. Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the cafe represented more than just a place to eat, it was a space for community and connection. As he began implementing the changes he had promised, he felt a wave of energy coursing through the establishment. The staff responded positively to the training, embracing the new direction with enthusiasm. Mabel watched her son with pride as he transformed the cafe into a beacon of inclusivity. He organized community events, inviting local leaders and activists to speak about diversity and respect. The Hearthstone Cafe began to flourish, not just as a business, but as a gathering place for those who shared a vision of equality. One evening, Mabel attended one of the events. She stood in the back of the room, observing the lively discussions taking place among the diners and community members. The atmosphere was electric, filled with laughter and camaraderie. She could feel the palpable sense of hope in the air, and it warmed her heart. As the night went on, Mabel found herself engaged in conversations with people she had never met before. They shared their stories, their struggles, and their dreams for a better world. Mabel felt a deep sense of connection to these individuals, united by their shared experiences. Toward the end of the evening, Marcus took to the stage, his voice resonating through the cafe. "Tonight is a celebration of our community," he announced, his eyes shining with passion. "We're here to acknowledge our differences and to embrace the strength that comes from unity. Together, we can create a place where everyone feels welcomed and respected." The crowd erupted in applause, and Mabel felt tears prick her eyes. This was the change she had hoped for, the movement she had dreamed of. She had fought not just for herself, but for a future where her son could thrive, where everyone could thrive, regardless of their background. As the night wore on, Mabel joined in the laughter, the conversations, and the connection that flowed through the cafe. She had witnessed the power of standing up against injustice, and it had sparked a fire within her that would not be extinguished. In the following weeks, the cafe continued to grow, attracting new customers who were eager to support the vision Marcus had cultivated. Word spread about the changes taking place, and people began traveling from neighboring towns to experience the warmth and inclusivity that the Hearthstone Cafe now represented. Mabel felt a profound sense of belonging each time she visited. She knew that while the fight against discrimination would never be truly over, they were making strides toward a better world. Together, they were creating a community that honored diversity and celebrated each individual's worth. One afternoon, as Mabel sipped her tea at her favorite table by the window, she spotted a group of young people entering the cafe. They looked around in awe, clearly taken by the inviting atmosphere. Mabel smiled, recognizing the same wonder she had felt when she walked through those doors years ago. As the weeks turned into months, Mabel and Marcus continued to lead the charge for change. They organized workshops, created mentorship programs for local youth, and collaborated with community leaders to amplify their message. They were building something beautiful, an inclusive environment that would foster understanding and respect for generations to come. Through it all, Mabel remained a steady force, sharing her wisdom and experiences with anyone who would listen. She found joy in mentoring young women who reminded her of herself, those who had faced challenges but were determined to rise above them. On a bright spring day, Mabel stood in front of a group of eager faces at a workshop held in the cafe. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she began, her voice strong and steady. "It takes courage, it takes resilience, and it takes a willingness to speak up when something isn't right. But together, we can make a difference. Together, we can create a world where everyone belongs." The young women listened intently, inspired by Mabel's strength and conviction. She saw the fire in their eyes, the same fire that had ignited within her all those years ago. As Mabel continued to share her story, she realized that her journey was far from over. Each day presented new challenges, new opportunities to fight for justice. She felt grateful for the support of her son, the community, and the newfound connections she had made. That evening, as she walked home hand in hand with Marcus, Mabel felt a sense of fulfillment that was hard to articulate. They had turned a moment of shame into a powerful movement, and she knew they were just getting started. "Mom, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done," Marcus said, breaking the comfortable silence. "You've shown me the importance of standing up for what's right. It's not just a lesson for the cafe, it's a lesson for life." Mabel smiled, squeezing his hand. "We all have the power to affect change, Marcus. It's our responsibility to lift each other up, to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. That's what community is all about." As they walked under the soft glow of streetlights, Mabel felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had found her voice, and with it, she had found her place in the world. The Hearthstone Cafe had become more than just a restaurant. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of standing together against injustice. From that day forward, Mabel and Marcus continued to inspire others to join the fight for equality. They believed in the power of community, and they knew that together, they could create a future where everyone had a seat at the table, a table for all.